There's a peptide craze that seems to be taking over. But what actually are peptides? Is there any evidence to support the benefits of them that companies and influencers are touting? How does the FDA fit into all of this? Paul Knoepfler, professor at UC Davis School of Medicine, helps us answer all of these questions and more.
Sure. So peptides are essentially small fragments of proteins. And in science, like I'm a molecular biologist, we think of peptides as just these little stretches of amino acids that have different activities in cells and in tissues. And so there's kind of an arbitrary cutoff between what's a peptide and like what's a big peptide and a small protein. Interestingly, here in the US, the FDA actually has an official cutoff of 40 amino acids. So anything up to 40 amino acids is a peptide, and then 41 and larger is a protein. And that may sound not necessarily that important, but it interestingly makes a big difference in terms of regulation.
Is there any evidence that these peptides do anything at all?
The evidence for the most popular peptides like BPC 157 mainly come from just studies of cells grown in dishes in the lab and studies on mice and rats and things like that. And what we know is that those studies more generally don't often tell us what's really going to happen in people, when people use certain things, whether it's stem cells or other things. And so with the peptides, I'm afraid there's really not sufficient evidence to support their use for almost anything. Some of the data in animals, I think could justify a really good human clinical trial, but people don't seem interested in doing that because it's so easy to make money off the peptides right now.
And you kind of mentioned that the increasing interest from the public in these peptides. Do we know what's kind of caused that?
I think it is mainly driven by health influencers. Interestingly, like people on Instagram and TikTok and with YouTube videos and stuff, they're really sort of hyping up these peptides like BPC 157 and GHK and some of the others as having all these almost like magical like properties, that can do all kinds of supposedly great things like help you recover faster from an injury or build muscle mass or reduce belly fat, or the list really goes on and on about all these claims. And so I think when powerful health influencers who already have a really large audience are touting these peptides, then it's interesting, but a lot of people seem to respond to that. And it's just almost become like a fad. It's kind of like, for whatever reason, it's been portrayed as almost like a cool thing to do is like to get these peptides and inject yourself or inject each other with these peptides. And again, they're unproven drugs, unapproved drugs. The science isn't really there. Things that are peptides, so up to 40 amino acids, are regulated differently. Different branches of the FDA regulate peptides and proteins, which I hadn't realized before a few years ago. And so a branch called CDER regulates peptides, and this is essentially the drug branch of the FDA. And then if you're working with something 41 amino acids or bigger, again, that's a protein. And CBER, the biologics center of the FDA, regulates that. So, these seem like minor things, but at a regulatory level, that can make a big difference in terms of whether something is treated a certain way or not. I should note, though, that both peptides and proteins generally are regulated as drugs, even though they're regulated by different branches of the FDA. And so that's really important when we think about these more popular peptides that are out there in, like the health influencer world and things like that. Because so many of these things that people are injecting or taking, in oral supplements or whatever are unapproved drugs. So their use is actually illegal. At least it seems like it should be illegal based on all the regulations that I'm aware of.
We talked a bit about the regulatory environment, kind of the past, and then what it looks like now. Is there any indication that things might kind of be changing in any way sometime soon?
Yeah, I think we might see some big changes. So while the FDA in 2023 restricted the most popular peptides, like they couldn't be compounded, it seems like the peptide world has a fan in the US's HHS Secretary, RFK Jr. Kennedy mentioned, I think it was at some point late in 2024, that supposedly the FDA was like repressing good things like stem cells and peptides. And then more recently, I saw that some Republican lawmakers had written to RFK Jr. asking him to go ahead and make the FDA allow peptide compounding to be okay again. For a few years, it seemed like they were in this more of a gray area in terms of regulatory oversight. And so compounding pharmacies here in the US, and these are pharmacies that can kind of put together specialized medicines. I think some of them had requested to the FDA that they be allowed to compound these popular peptides. And while that was sort of under consideration, it seems like for a few years, the peptides could actually be used by or produced by compounding pharmacies. So it was somewhat a different situation up until 2023 when the FDA said, it kind of listed out boom, boom, boom. And their list was like many of the most popular peptides now could not be compounded. They actually were put on this list in this thing called Category 2, which meant because of a lack of data and some concerns about risk that no, these could not be compounded.
So, where is all of this headed next? It turns out we didn't have to wait too long to find out. After we recorded this interview, we had some new developments, with RFK Jr. saying on a podcast that he's used some of these peptides himself. He went on to say that, as head of the HHS, which oversees the FDA, he plans to once again allow compounding pharmacies to make certain peptides that the FDA had stopped allowing under the Biden administration. Seems like the peptide craze is just beginning.